Does Jesus really predict the fall of the temple in Mark 13? Hi, everybody. My name is Robyn Walsh. I'm a scholar of New Testament and early Christianity and part of Paths in Biblical Studies. Throughout the month of September, I've been promoting our NINT New Insights into the New Testament conference. It's been going on over the last few days. We still have a few events forthcoming, but go over to bartehrman.com/NINT to check out our fantastic lineup of scholars. As you know, I've been interfacing, as I've put it, with the topics these scholars have been presenting throughout the month in anticipation of the conference. And today I want to talk about this question of Jesus and the temple. And I'm thinking about the presentation of Dr. Paula Fredrickson, who proposed that it seems unlikely Jesus ever predicted the fall of the temple, which is precisely what happens in Mark 13. A couple of things. One is I love that Dr. Fredrickson decided to talk about this subject because she, as far as I know, is the one who coined the phrase temple tantrum to describe what Jesus does when he turns the tables in the temple. And I'll never think of it another way. It's always going to be the temple tantrum to me. But also, this question of Mark 13. Now, we've talked about Mark being the earliest gospel before. And how we know this and why scholars put this forward as a hypothesis. Now, one reason, there are some internal reasons to the structure of Mark. You can go back to some other videos where we talk about this. I'll talk more about the Gospels in future videos, of course. But Mark 13 tends to be one of these pillars that people refer to justify this idea that it is the earliest Gospel. Because in Mark 13, Jesus does say that if you look at the temple, no stone will go unturned, or the temple itself is going to be destroyed. Look at it, the specific passage. I'm using the NRSV here because that's what most of you probably have at home. But they say, "Teacher, what large stones and what large buildings?" And Jesus says, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another, all will be thrown down." And then Jesus goes on to foretell of a terrible time, these birth pangs before essentially the end time and the return of the Messiah and the coming of the Son of Man. Sometimes this is referred to in your study Bibles as the desolating sacrilege, and truly it is awful that there will be a time, and he says that he hopes it's not winter, that women are not nursing children, or, woe to the women who are giving birth or nursing children at this time, because it's going to be so awful. There will be warfare, there will be destruction, and all of Judea will have to flee to the mountains. He says that, again, Mark 13, fleeing to the mountains, happens in verse 14. So, for the most part, scholars interpret both the discussion of the fall of the temple, and I would say even this compounded with this very specific Judea will flee to the mountains. It makes me think of Masada. It makes me think of the end of the Jewish war and how many people have to both flee Jerusalem, flee Judea because it's left in ruins, but also seek the high ground, right? I think that in combination, these things suggest that Mark was written after the war, that it was written after a time when these things were known to have taken place. And that's why some scholars will call this passage very vivid. How vivid is it? It's specific. I think it's very specific. And it is a kind of predictable prophetic speech in the sense that the temple, the idea that the temple is in threat, is something that I wouldn't put past a prophet to predict. However, the fact that it is coming at a time when the Jewish war would be at the forefront of many people's minds. And I do think that the destruction of the temple would have been, I even think about Paul, right? I don't think many people would have thought that was even possible again. Yet it takes place. And so as devastating as that was, but then, the specificity of sort of, having to flee the region tells us or suggests to us that this was written after those events took place. Now, did Jesus actually predict this? I would be surprised. Of course, I don't know for sure. As I say, prophets would often predict something along these lines. However, I think that regardless of whether or not the historical Jesus ever predicted this, it does speak to the devastation of that war. It does speak to the potential, again, dating of Mark. And the significance of that war as a catalyst potentially for even writing the Gospels themselves. Don't forget that if you look at Paul's letters, he's not so worried about the historical Jesus. He's more worried about the Messiah, about Christ, and about the return of Christ. That is present in this chapter too. but it's coupled with the reality on the ground, the political, social reality on the ground that this war has taken place. So this is both why scholars look to Mark 13 to help locate the Gospels in terms of a timeline. They look to Mark 13 to help them understand exactly the impact of that war. And for this to be in the mouth of Jesus, particularly in Mark, where he does seem to shroud himself in a certain amount of secrecy, I think that's all significant for thinking through the objectives of the gospel writer. That helps us understand not only Jesus's significance for those reading the Gospels after the war, but also the necessity of providing some kinds of account of Jesus's life, of his activities in the Gospels, because once that war took place, I think it was probably pretty evident to people that the end time wasn't going to come as quickly as perhaps Paul and others hoped that it would. If these topics interest you, please go over to bartehrman.com/BSA Learning. We have several courses on the New Testament, on biblical studies over there, but also, again, check out bartehrman.com/NINT to go back to some of the conference topics we've had on the historical Jesus, so you have both options to explore your interests.